This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.
Good morning. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Politico's Sustainable Future Week. My name is Victor Jack, and I'm an energy reporter at Politico. So, it's been more than 2 years since the EU agreed on the Just Transition Mechanism, a landmark initiative made up of almost 20 billion euros in cash, technical assistance, and wider support that aims to ensure that as Brussels pursues its ambitious net zero goals, it doesn't leave those in coal and mining regions behind, which after all represent the core workers that initially tied the union together. With Bulgaria becoming the last EU country to submit its plan for moving regions away from coal and racing to finish negotiations with the Commission by the end of the year, implementation of the initiative is getting well underway. But a changing political climate poses both challenges and opportunities for the scheme. Rising competition with China and the US on clean technology is starkly highlighting the importance of moving skilled workers to new green sectors short of employees. But a ballooning cost of living crisis is making many aware of job insecurity, while challenging the political consensus around green policies. A brief reminder to ask your questions through the Swap Card platform and to talk about us on X or the social media platform of your choice. So, without further ado, let's welcome our panelists. Here we have Eero Ailio, advisor on energy transition and local governance at DG ENER, the European Commission. We have Nicola De Michelis, director for smart and sustainable growth at DG Regio at the European Commission. And we have Anelia Stefanova, the strategic area leader, energy transformation at CEE Bankwatch Network. Great. So, looking forward to getting into a lively discussion with our panelists. I want to sort of broadly sketch out three broad themes in our discussion today. Firstly, looking a little bit at how we got here in the Just Transition and mechanism and the plan and the funds so far. Some of the challenges posed today by the initiative. And I want to finish a little bit looking at future dilemmas and challenges for the Just Transition in Europe. I think perhaps it would be helpful if we started off by just sketching out what it is, and perhaps, Eero, it would be helpful if we started with you. I mean, as flagged, it's been 2 years since it was agreed. Why is this mechanism important? What was it meant to achieve? And how would you rate the success of the scheme so far?
Okay, thank you, and good morning, everyone here. It's a pleasure to be here. So, straight to the point, why is it important? Well, actually, it became pretty clear right in the beginning of the discussion on not just Green Deal, but particularly the clean energy transition, that things are actually getting a bit more complicated in the energy field when the closer we go to decarbonization goals and things like that. Complicated also in the sense that we have to involve consumers. You know, in this room, actually, we have to get active so that we can reach those higher levels of energy efficiency and introduce renewables and so on. So technology comes in, digital technology, smart metering, all these kinds of things come in. So that means it gets complex. And not everybody has the same capacity to sort of participate in this kind of a transition in a way that they can profit from it, be part of it in a fair manner. So it was clear that, okay, we have to do something about that. Help this kind of awareness, so that's sort of consumer-oriented work, and make sure that nobody is left behind, because it's going to fail otherwise, the transition. And then focus on these coal regions, came on top of the agenda, and a little later on also carbon-intensive regions, industries which use a lot of fossil energy. So we thought, okay, well, if we just let the market fix this, so then we end up in a situation where there are going to be winners and losers, and socially that's not going to be acceptable. And that is where the whole just transition work started. First with coal transition initiative, and then going broader into just transition. And that's like the real reason. We have to help these regions to find ways to go into sustainable economies, turn, reconvert, reskill, and all this kind of thing. And then indeed, the just transition mechanism was set up, the fund and the rest. And colleague on my left here, Nicola, I mean, he knows more about that, so we should perhaps look into this. Let me stop there.
No, thank you for that introduction and sort of a broad overview. Yeah, Nicola, I'd like to come to you. I mean, the coal sector alone in the EU counts over 160,000 jobs. And one aspect that I've heard brought up in this discussion is how are we measuring the success of the just transition and of migrating jobs over? I was just wondering whether you could tell us a little bit what metrics for the success of the scheme is the Commission using? And can you tell us how many former workers in coal and mining regions have successfully found new employment since it was put into place?
Thank you. Look, it's a bit too early to tell you how many workers found a job, because the Just Transition Fund is only starting now. It has been delayed for a number of reasons, and now I think that the key concern we have is precisely to implement it. I'll come back in a second to your question, but I wanted to follow up on what Hiro just said, and is the adjustment cost that is related to the transition. Remember the end of the multi-fiber agreement in 2000, and there were plenty of regions in Europe, textile, depending on textile, that didn't adjust. The following adjustment was tremendously painful in terms of loss of job. And what the Transition Fund is trying to do is precisely to anticipate, because the transition is going to happen. And therefore, either you embrace it, or you simply you have to suffer from a chaotic adjustment without where workers are left alone. Now, what are the metrics? What we ask the regions concerned is to set up plans in which they have to demonstrate that the number of jobs that are lost, and the investment that are needed to try to compensate and to retrain the people and to focus on new sectors that would allow those people to move on. Let me just give you an example. In Groningen, that was largely depending on natural gas extraction. That extraction is finished, and the regions has invested in bioplastic, in green hydrogen, becoming a hub for this type of new sectors. You have the competences, you have the skills, you have to concentrate on retraining, and this is what the fund is trying to do, and this is how we will measure toward the end of the implementation of the fund whether there's been successful or not.
So to clarify then, do you have a sort of EU-wide database set up for measuring exactly, how many workers will be transitioned sort of to new jobs, or is that something that you're still exploring at the moment?
We are depending on the numbers that the regions are submitting to us. This doesn't mean that we accept everything. We challenge very often. I think that our role, in fact, is to ask the right question and to challenge what the numbers are put on the table. Those numbers sometimes are revised, and that become the point of reference to assess whether over time the fund is addressing and providing alternatives for those jobs that are at risk of disappearing because of the transition.
Great. And Elia, I want to bring you in here a little bit. I mean, how successful have you found the program so far? And when it comes to this sort of data issue, is this something that you've been working on as well, in thinking a little bit about, how exactly do we capture the success of the scheme in its implementation?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being part of this distinguished panel. Bankwatch Network is one of the groups working very actively on a daily basis with mayors, with local authorities on designing the ambitious just transition plans. Over the last year, we worked in 20 regions in Central and East Europe, and to correct you, indeed, the process started even before this, the Just Transition Fund adoption, because many of the regions was already informed of discussing of what will be the Just Transition Plan. But I think the Just Transition process itself and the way it was framed by the Commission and the Parliament, it was really a unique opportunity for these regions, because it put a spotlight on them. I mean, these are regions which was largely forgotten or not in the attention of the policymakers at national level. The transition in some of these regions was already going for decades. I mean, speaking about, for example, Jiu Valley in Romania, the layoff of people was starting in the 90s in coal regions, and miners was losing jobs for years, and brain drain and unemployment was an issue already there. So the opportunity to look at these regions and really prepare, how the previous speaker said, about the transition, it was a great opportunity for them to really bring their ideas and start discussion on transition plan. Some of them really did it very well. And this was very useful and important that the Commission, especially both DG Regio and DG Energy, was on the same path about inclusion of the local authorities, good dialogue between stakeholders and governments, because again, there was a lot of miscommunication and discussion. And where we have problems like Bulgaria, it's exactly because this discussion didn't happen properly between national and local level. But let me just say why I see this Just Transition process and Just Transition Fund as a really important success story for Europe, which could be told across also other countries which are in the similar type of processes, is that we had two key elements. I mean, again, the Just Transition Fund, which was small fund, but have a component of reforms required, I mean, really commitment for decarbonization, which really made it clear, you make a commitment, you get funding. And this was a really aspect which was taken seriously by the Commission staff negotiating and also by local authorities. And the second important thing is that Just Transition Fund, which although be part of Cohesion Fund, clearly excluded fossil fuel investments. So there was no space for false solutions. So we have today a good mix of social, environmental, and economic type of measures and investments in the Just Transition plans. I mean, it could be better, and I think we could discuss later on that, but overall, it was really a good and very important process of exchange, learning, and capacity building going on across 27 countries.
Great, great. And I'm glad that you've touched on some of the challenges, which we'll get onto in a second. But Nicola, I'd like to bring you in here still on measuring the success of the scheme so far. I mean, as we've seen in recent days, there's a scandal engulfing the Portuguese government, which shows that just because a project is focused around the green transition doesn't necessarily mean it's clean. I mean, especially with technologies and products which are not yet commercially scaled, so green hydrogen, energy storage, for example. How is the Commission actually measuring that the money will be well spent?
It depends very much on what you mean by well spent. If by well spent you mean whether the money is spent regularly, and according to the rules, well, there are a system of controls and audits. I think that the JTF, I consider that the JTF and cohesion policy is one of the most audited and controlled policy in Europe. We have 4 levels of controls. The managing authorities on the ground needs to control that everything is fine. The audit control is going to control that the managing authority has done its job. We are going to check that the audit authority has controlled that it's super controlled. So, and this is why, by the way, the recent affairs in Portugal, we were able very fast to check whether some of those projects were concerned by financing by EU funding, and they were not. From that perspective, there is a system that ensures the legality of the expenditure. If by well spent you mean on the right policy choices, well, that is the part of the negotiation and the preparation on the just transition plan that we have spent 1.5 years, more or less, to negotiate with the member state, precisely to decide which were the sectors, which were the skills that were needed, which were the areas in which those investments had to take place. You can always discuss whether the end result is the optimal one, but I think that at the end of the day, and I think Anelia can confirm, is we have solid plans, and now, as I said, we need to ensure that the follow-up investment match and reflect those commitments. And a final word, and you're absolutely right, the JTF is an instrument that has a number of very clear way to ensure that it does what it's supposed to do. For example, if a member state is backtracking on some of his commitment, there is a way for the commissioner to intervene and say, wait a second, you said that you were doing something, you received the money for that, and now things are changing. So it's not a free lunch. It's an instrument that is well framed, I think, and even innovative in many ways, because it's targeting small areas with a strong partnership element that also ensure that there is a degree of public debate on how the money is used and transparency on how that money and the money is used. So I'm honestly not too worried about the money well spent.
Okay, no, that's interesting to hear. And perhaps just before we move on, Edo, I'd like to bring you in as well. I mean, perhaps another measurement of success is whether the JTF has actually encouraged countries to phase out their coal earlier. But there's still obviously a huge variety of coal phase-out dates, which started, from Belgium back in 2016 all the way to Poland in 2049 or even possibly beyond. I mean, does that show that the initiative is lacking some strength?
No, I think that it shows the different situations in those countries. So there's the overall trend, which is an economic trend, which just tells, even if we did nothing, that coal is not viable economically. So it's this source of energy is going to disappear from the energy mixes anyway. So now it's a question of timing. And like you said, indeed, if we look at now the current plans, so there are countries like, I think, Slovenia, which is, date is this year. And then, like you said, Poland, 2049, so, and lots of things in between. And so it shows basically the different structures and of the countries, how much this plays role in their system. I think there are now 2 countries left where hard coal is produced in Europe, so that's not a lot. And indeed, I was looking at the statistics, the 22 statistics. So the coal use production was all down. So it's happening. I don't see there any kind of like a failure or backtracking. The crisis last year affected. I mean, it caused higher usage of coal in countries like Germany. But that's a kind of a temporary phenomenon, which is going to remain a blip there. That's the way we feel.
Perfect, and I think that's a great segue onto our next topic, which is talking about some of the challenges kind of today. And as you've said, we've seen this modest coal bounce back following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Counts for about 11% of power generation today. But we have seen, perhaps from the plan's perspective, some slightly worrying trends, with some countries delaying their coal phase-outs, France to 2027, Hungary was extending 1 coal plant to 2029, Estonia delayed the closure of some of its oil shale plants as well. Nicola, I'd like to bring you back in. What kind of are the implications for the success of the just transition and the implementation of the plans from these delays and from the energy security crisis?
Well, first of all, let me add one element to what you just asked. In fact, if the JTF had an effect is in accelerating the reflection in certain member states on the phasing out. There were member states that did not have plans, and because of the JTF, had to think about it and commit. This is the case of the Czechia, this is the case of Croatia, Romania, Slovenia. So there was an effect there. Now, obviously, the world in the meantime has slightly changed, and this has created short-term pressure to revise a bit the policy mix and some of the timing of this phasing out, but it's clear that the phasing out is there to stay. There's no doubt about it. And I think that Vice President Šefčovič said exactly this at the JTP platform a few days ago. So it's, yes, there are adjustments. Yes, you're right, there's a bit of short-term delays, but I have no doubt about the fact that the 2030 and 2050 goal are not going to change an inch.
Okay, interesting. And Elia, do you kind of agree with this analysis? I mean, has the energy security crisis, in your view, been a bit of an excuse for some to kick the can down the road on coal, and perhaps are some governments even taking advantage of the situation to delay their phase-outs?
Yeah, it's true that some of the governments indeed are trying to negotiate delay, but I'm not sure this is in favor of their citizens and also the coal regions itself. I mean, I said before, the coal business was already losing for many years, and it was the reason why it was reforming, slowly phasing out and laying off people. So there is no doubt, if I speak with coal miner in Pernik or in Poland, in Pernik, Bulgaria, or in Poland, in Wielkopolska, that they know they need to phase out, and we need to plan for the future. And they also start to see the opportunities of creating different type of jobs, and clearly replacing one industry with another, it would be not a solution. So we need to find a way to really think about what could be the future jobs for these regions. And we speak about mastodontic type of industry, which could be not easily, obviously, shifted and replaced. Some regions are more impacted, some less, because of the geographical situation and because of the how the coal industry developed in them. But the very important part of this is that we keep really the focus of the transition should happen. And there are enormous amount of opportunities which could be embraced through the EU funding, through the exchange of experience and practices across Europe already going on in different regions, which could be translated. But what is the key challenge for these regions is capacity. Most of these regions, I mean, I think probably only a few countries in Central and East Europe which have a kind of regional autonomy is Poland and Romania, but all the rest have very little capacity, knowledge, and regional management of the funds. So we need to have more of regional capacity building, local level capacity building for those regions. And this is both challenge, but an opportunity also, because it's also bringing people back to these regions. And we, as Europe, could be a really good example for the rest of the world, because indeed we have a good, highly educated people, which could be helpful for bringing transition and making it innovative and inclusive. Yeah, it's important to have the Commission support that there is no delay and there is no need to postpone the phase out, and also not to make a compromise, obviously, with the commitments which was done so far.
No, that's really interesting. And Edo, I'd like to bring you in here as well. I mean, does this trend of perhaps delaying, whether it's temporarily or not, coal phase-outs, worry you a little bit? And touching also a little bit on what Anelia was saying in terms of setting a good example for the world. Obviously, a key EU initiative is the Just Energy Transition Partnership with countries like South Africa to help them, ease their way off coal. Is there a risk that delays within the EU kind of damage a little bit the credibility of those international efforts as well?
I think like I say, I would not see that risk there, at least at this stage. I mean, if things were to continue to get worse in that sense, further delays, then we should probably have be concerned about that. But what we've seen so far doesn't seem to be the case. I would say, I think it's good you mentioned the South African example, because that's one of the I would say, relatively few examples where we've gone sort of abroad with the concept. It is, we have the Western Balkans coal transition initiative as well. So we've been discussing with countries around Europe about this a little bit, but the just transition file, if I call it that, so it is quite sort of European in the sense that it was looking into how we can sort out the problems in Europe or actually avoid problems getting worse so that accompany the transition in the smartest possible way. So we are not so much looking at this as a kind of like a foreign policy tool, if I say like that, but it's clear that we are speaking about it with other countries, particularly the coal nations like South Africa. And we want to share all that knowledge, and we've seen that this has grown into quite a big theme internationally, and I think it's good, because I don't believe that you can have any transition in an inclusive way unless you focus on this part. And also energy poverty, which is another topic we haven't really touched, but it's a very closely connected phenomenon that got much worse last year when we had the crisis. So you have to really look at these social aspects of the transition if you want to be serious about achieving them.
Absolutely. And Nicola, perhaps I'd like to bring you back in as well. I mean, member states were supposed to have kind of submitted their plans by the end of this year, and approval kind of following afterwards as well. Bulgaria is yet to have its plan greenlit by the Commission, and please update me if I'm wrong, but the Commission's website seems to be showing that there are still several regions in Slovenia, Poland, and Slovakia where the plans have not been approved. Why is this, and what needs to be done to approve them?
Look, the only plan that is not that are not adopted are the one of Bulgaria because of political development in the country, and discussions are ongoing now with the new government to close it, and we are confident that this will happen. Now, it is true that the level of progress on the JTF, on implementation of the JTF varies between countries for a number of reasons, because of the late adoption of the regulation, because of the energy crisis, because of the fact that many of the authorities that are supposed to manage these funds were new and had to learn new instruments. And many of them were focusing on the implementation of the recovery and resilience facility, because at the end of the day, administrative capacity is what it is. And so this explains why the start has been slow. But I think, and this is why I'm very much, my key message is to concentrate on implementation and not get too much distracted by other things, because this is the essence. But things are happening. You were mentioning Russia. Well, Estonia received around 350 million euro of Just Transition Fund. One of the interesting projects that they have, that they are implementing, is in the city of Narva, which is 150 kilometers from St. Petersburg, at the border with Russia. They are now constructing a plant for the production of rare earth materials that are used in wind turbines and electric vehicles. So it shows that things are happening. There are other regions that are a bit slower, and this is why, and the question of capacity is a key issue. We have set in place a plethora of instruments that are available to regions to use. With the Just Transition platform, the conference that is taking place twice a year is a place in which all these actors comes together, with the JTP groundwork that is providing technical assistance to, if I remember correctly, regions in Latvia, Poland, Portugal, Romania, and Sweden, with the e-peer that allows people to work together. We are creating a database of experts on these matters that regions have access to, and so on and so on. So we are launching a new calls for the JTP groundwork. So what I'm saying is that we realize that there are capacity constraints, and we have putting in place a number of instruments of assistance to support regions to to accelerate implementation. Let's not forget that most of these interventions are in less developed regions, not all of them, but a large majority of it, where there is historically a weaker public administration. So, all this contributes to make the implementation not easy, but I think that we will make it in the end.
Great. And earlier, touching on the same issue, I mean, you've mentioned this already a little bit, but I mean, on the one hand, the approach has won praise for a more kind of decentralized and localized approach that brings together kind of different local stakeholders together in these conferences. But on the other hand, I've heard complaints, for example, in Hungary and in Bulgaria that, it actually has been a much more top-down approach, the crafting of these plans, than was initially conceived, and a lot of NGOs and unions feel excluded from them. How much of a problem is this, and what can the Commission do to kind of alleviate this problem?
I think Commission indeed is quite on our side that it is a problem and need to be addressed, and I think they do make the efforts. Obviously, we have a bit of problem with legal instruments for that. I mean, we have Code of Conduct on Partnership, which is so-called obligatory mechanism for inclusion of stakeholders, but it's not perfect because indeed it gives a lot of room of maneuver for the member states to decide who to include and how to include, and also you have normally monitoring committees where you would have 45 state authorities and 4 NGOs representatives or civil society representatives in one room to vote together and discuss together. Obviously, there's a lot of disbalance in is it really common decision making? And I think there is an interest from the Commission to move towards co-decision and bigger transparency, I hope, also, and public engagement in the monitoring of the funding. Because I would not be so convinced that everything would go perfectly well if we as NGOs or civil society are not there to watch out and provide information to the Commission also what is going on local level with the specific projects, investments, and if this is the right choice. Because we are also in the process of learning better and more what is the right choice for switching a coal power plant, what will be the best way to supply energy for the households, for the industry, and indeed we have more and more technologies which are helping us today, but the choice is not simply the same in every region, and it should be studied case by case. So applying same recipe everywhere, it's not working, and you need to have a local eyes and ears to basically help you to understand where the problems are and where you need to accelerate, and we could make a right type of investments which are inclusive and addressing the issues of jobs creation. Because, for example, in sectors like replacing the coal power plant with the renewable energy power plant, you have 10 to 15% of jobs which will be replaced, will be saved, but the rest need to go in a different type of sectors like energy communities, energy efficiency, circular economy. There are a number of opportunities, but we need a cultural change on these places to discuss what is the possible way to construct the industrial model, because you have regions where 80% of the economy was a coal industry or a shale oil industry. So this is a really hard time to change, but good framework is a good and important thing, and I think we still need to do some more work in the next budget period to improve this framework. And I said public participation and transparency could become better, and to ensure that co-decision and in the designing and implementation of the funding is part of the legislation. And we need also more of the opportunity to build capacity and invest in education, social aspects, which was mentioned by the previous speaker, because inclusion of the vulnerable groups, the inclusion of the one which will be impacted of the transition into and providing basic services is one of the things which we hear in the region, that often they lack good education, good health services, good infrastructure. So this is something where more jobs could be created and overall opportunity for people to come back to this region.
Perfect. And Nicola, we've kind of, perhaps it's useful to zoom into one country in particular. And we've already mentioned Poland. It wanted to set a date for phase out for 2049. Obviously, we now have a new government that's likely to come into power, which has pledged to decarbonize its energy sector by 2030. I mean, historically, a bit more of a laggard on this issue. Are you optimistic that under this new government, this could perhaps speed up or improve the implementation of the JTF in Poland and perhaps even accelerate its coal phase-out date?
Well, look, it's the mechanics of the instrument that is creating that pressure. Because if member states do not accelerate, they will lose the money. As simple as that. 70% of the money under the JTF is linked to Next Generation EU. And Next Generation EU ends in 2026, which means that the pressure is there whether a government wants or doesn't want. In fact, already Bulgaria, with the delay of 1 year in adopting their programs, has lost some money of 2022. It's the only case, I hope the only one. But I have no particular doubt on the fact that member states are well aware that now at the end of 23 there is a need to get their act together and accelerate things because the deadlines are approaching very fast. That independent of the color of the government. Could I just come back on a second on the question of partnership? Because I think that this is crucial in this debate. It's clear that, well, let me start by the beginning. We think that Brussels is too far away from the ground to tell people what they need to do, and sometimes even capitals are a bit too far away. That doesn't mean that the local actors are always right, and I think that there is a need for an external agent that checks and asks the right questions, but at the end of the day, they are well placed to decide what they need. And this is why this partnership is so important. Obviously, this depends very much on cultures and administrative arrangements, and it varies from one member state to the other, from one region to the other. I think that our role, the role of civil society, of ONG, is precisely to keep the pressure and to continue to maintain attention on how the money is spent and keep that public discussion alive. We, our commission, are part of the committees that monitor and manage the fund, and we systematically ask and ensure that the stakeholders are present in that decision-making body. So this is, I think that we should not lose sight of how important it is for the quality of the strategy and its implementation to have all the actors around the table.
But perhaps just to frame that a little bit differently, or to sum up your point, I mean, will this new government in Poland, in your view, perhaps be more proactive in recognizing and acting on this pressure that you've kind of highlighted to kind of spend that money?
Victor, I'm responsible for the south of Europe, so I have no. What I mean is that I'm not in direct contact and conversation with the new government. I have no particular reason to believe that this government will not act as fast as they can, because of the constraints that I think that this is not going to be a political issue. It's going at this point. It may have been 2 years ago, but now it's really a question of managing and ensuring that the money gets to the ground and is spent, because there is no government, whatever the color, that is ready to go and say, I lost billions of euro because, sorry, I was a bit slow.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Great, and just I want to now just tackle one last topic together, looking a little bit at the future dilemmas of this issue. Eero, I'd like to come to you. I mean, since the plan was first conceptualized a few years ago, a lot has changed in global politics. You know, we've seen very much one industrial revolution based on fossil fuels wane, and another based much more on clean energy and critical materials overtake it, with the EU now kind of scrambling to make sure it's not left behind the US and China on this. I mean, in your view, is the just Just Transition Fund and mechanism ready to respond and to address some of these issues in this new geopolitical reality and help in this regard?
Well, the Just Transition Fund or mechanism and the different parts of it. So I think it comes at the right time in the sense that we are under the pressure. It started before first of all, it started before the energy crisis, and which was good because now indeed the plans are already very advanced, and we have to indeed push for the implementation. So I think the timing was good. Also, the focus when you look at it. If you look at international competition, I'm not sure we're always like scrambling. I wouldn't use that word necessarily. It's true there are challenges like wind industry, for example. So we've been leaders in wind technology, and we've been losing market share to China, for instance. That's clear. And so that's an issue, and that's why we now launched the wind initiative, as you will know. So the elements that we are sort of favoring through the Just Transition mechanism, the solutions, apart from, of course, reskilling, upskilling, all these things, which are very important, and this sort of economic conversion. So it is all going into the direction of indeed renewable, clean tech, and also trying to benefit from the fact that these regions, say coal regions, for instance, so these are regions who have already let's say the right mentality. They're used to industrial activities. They have the industrial sites there. They have the grids. They have a lot of assets actually, which make them very well placed to take over and jump to other technologies. Like in Spain, they've gone into Aragon, for example, has gone into wind actually, solar and wind, but particularly wind. Another town went into supercomputing and all these kinds of things. So it's they go in the technology. And that is what we need. And when you talk about how comparisons to the other regions, it was interesting, I just read about this, that investment in green hydrogen, for example, to Europe, they're bigger than to China and US together. So it looks, from that point of view, it looks quite positive. And I believe indeed that JTF is one aspect of that. There are other aspects. And now you didn't ask me this, but I'm never leaving a conference without talking about municipalities and cities, and I think it's been great to listen to Anneli here because I'm very much involved in sort of steering things like Global Covenant of Mayors and Smart Cities Marketplace and these kinds of bottom-up initiatives, which exactly go into this direction of helping the local level to take up and test the policies, the legislation we are fielding, and we're really getting into discussion with them on that. And then we have also in the governance regulation, so we have actually put in writing and a requirement on member states to involve the local level through multi-level dialogues into the national energy and climate planning, which is actually connected to the TJTPs. So there we are very aware, and not just aware, actually we are really pushing for this local knowledge to be, and involvement to be there so that we do the right decisions. Like, both Nicola and you were saying, we don't know them here. At the local level, they have much better knowledge on that. So I'm really glad to hear what's been said here.
And and thanks. And I think, tying that to the broader EU's competitiveness, Anneli, I'm interested in your thoughts as well. It's now clear that there are, holes in some of the key sectors the EU is betting on for its clean energy transition. The EU wind industry will need another 50,000 trained staff by 2030. The solar sector needs to double its workers to 1 million by 2030 as well. Do you think we're taking advantage enough of this gap and of migrating kind of workers into these sectors that need employment so much within the Just Transition mechanism?
Yeah, I think we could always do better. We could definitely accelerate even more because we really ahead of us we have huge challenges with the climate change, with the biodiversity loss, with the resource shortages, which we need to be tackled in a more and more efficient way. So clearly, I think they are excellent solutions, but the exchange and getting more experience at local level would be excellent. I mean, working with regions, I would mention that in some regions you have plans for development of solar power, solar panels factories, for generation district heating. Indeed, there are regions which are, I mean, there are regions which are really pioneering today. Being laggards in the past, they are pioneering practices and solutions, which could be also example for other industrial regions across Europe. But I wanted just also to flag one more opportunity that Europe could be indeed exporting and sharing these practices also with Western Balkans and Ukraine, being our neighbors and also being very much connected to our energy and market. It's very important that we have the same mechanism for them, which is currently not existing, like just transition process, because it's managed through the loans, not through the grant element, which could allow for indeed capacity building and type of innovative solutions which need some de-risking. Yesterday there was a lot of talk about industrial policy of Europe and the need to de-risk certain type of investments which are more innovative, which are also looking at small-scale solutions which are sometimes more sustainable at local level.
Great, great. And we're just kind of running out of time, but Nicola, I'd like to just end with one question to you as well. I mean, one kind of long-standing fight when this was being agreed to begin with was the total amount of cash earmarked for the just transition was kind of insufficient, which is an issue that's perhaps gained new impetus now that we realize, what's at stake. So EU competitiveness, but also perhaps as we look to expand the plan to perhaps other sectors, steel and maybe others. And also in light of, the European Court of Auditors last year released a report saying that the EU didn't assess the extent of the funding needs for the initiative, which present a risk that the funds meant to alleviate the socio-economic cost of the transition might be spent without the transition effectively taking place. So I just want to get your take. Do you think that the Commission should be open to asking for more money to expand the just transition?
Of course, the sky is the limit. Unfortunately, it's not. The limit is elsewhere. I think that as far as the JTF as we know it now is budgetary endowment is given. I don't see anywhere in sight appetite for increasing. Also because, let's face it, because of the capacity issue we're faced, I'm not sure that pouring additional money will necessarily facilitate things. However, I think that this will be a central part of the conversation on the next budget of the Union, that for sure. Because if anything, the current energy situation will require an even faster transition. And as, again, the Vice President says, either the transition is just or there is no transition. And so we need to have a system that accompany and limit the cost of that transition. And all the literature that have emerged in the past few months on the cost of inaction and the political cost of inaction of the Union in certain areas. So I think that the question of the transition, whether with the Just Transition Fund or with an instrument with a similar construction, will remain at the center of the discussion. What will be the landing zone in that budgetary debate is beyond my pay grade, but I cannot imagine that, given the current situation, this will not remain a center, as a main pillar of the budgetary effort of the Union.
So kind of in summary, it should be a core part of the discussion of the MFF review, and hopefully more money kind of should be earmarked for this plan. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it will certainly remain a central pillar, for sure.
All right, perfect. Okay, well, I want to thank everyone so much for attending this panel. I want to thank our speakers for attending as well and for a very lively discussion. We've got a short break, but we should be back. We should be back in the next 5 minutes or so. All right, well, thank you so much.
Thanks to you, Victor.
Thank you very much. See you soon. Okay.